Good?
Perfect.
This is our primary tool that we use to help make sure that we meet our clients' needs, right? This is it. This is it. So we gotta, in order to do that, what do you gotta know?
What's in it?
Everything.
What's in the contract, okay? What else?
What it means. Understand.
What it means, What else?
How to relay it to whoever's signing.
Okay, how to communicate, yeah, what this says. But in order to use it to meet the client's needs, you've got to know
What they want.
what they want,
Ah.
right?
Yeah.
I
You've
was
got to know
trying
what
to
their
give
needs
them
are. So what oftentimes happens is we know that they want a house, right? We know what they're approved for, and we don't go much further, deeper than that. We may know, okay, they want a good backyard, or they want, those kinds of issues. They want 3 bathrooms, they want 4 bedrooms. I mean, you're good at that, okay? Because, they're not gonna look at the houses unless you give them that. But in terms of money, we don't spend enough time figuring out, okay, where does the money need to land in order for them to be happy with you at the end of the process. Because if they're not happy with you at the end of the process, not only will you not get referrals, you will get negative referrals, right? They will say bad things about you. And I can't stress enough, this is a referral-based business. So when we do a good job, it will eventually get you more money. Okay, don't delude yourself. That is how we make this work. Okay, so that's very important. So we've got to know how to use this to get them to their bottom line that they have in their mind. So we have to figure out what they have in their mind. And we also have to know what this does, and we have to know how they work together, okay? Now on a little side note, they may have special needs that are out of the ordinary. That's another big thing that you gotta know. For example, around here, this is, especially lately, we've had so much water, right? And so this is a warm, moist climate, and underneath houses, it's very common for there to be fungus, mold. It's usually not the bad mold, but that's a common thing, especially older homes that have been around for a while, or a house that's been sitting for a while. If you have a client that is got bad mold allergies, and this is a huge deal, you need to put that in the additional provisions of the contract, okay? Because that is something out of the ordinary that you're making this contract contingent upon, right? Anything that they, it has to be contingent upon them being approved for, changing it for wheelchair access or whatever. Anything out of the ordinary, you wanna make sure you put it in the contract, okay? If you know it, which that's part of your job is to figure that out, you gotta put it in there when you sign the contract so that you can use that to get out, right? If somebody's got really bad mold allergies, when they walk in after a big rain and all of a sudden, it all kicks in, they're wanting out of that. I mean, they don't care. They want out, right? So you just gotta make sure you're covering them on things like that. That's just a good example. It's a little bit of an aside. Okay, so we're gonna buzz through pretty quickly the top part of it, quickly for me. We're gonna start with the first line. That's a good place to start. The undersigned purchaser hereby agrees to purchase. The undersigned purchaser blank. Okay? Do you remember what we said about how we determine what to put there?
What's gonna be on the deed?
What's gonna be on the deed? So the best way for you to begin Well, I mean, by now you've already done it, but one way in doing this contract to continue with that message, I'm here for you. I'm here on your side. I'm here on your behalf. I've got your back. Is you ask them, how do you want your name to appear on the deed, right? It's a little subtle, silly little thing, but it matters. How do you want your name to appear on the deed? And then that's how you put it on there. Now, you gotta make sure to tell them to tell their lender that, because if their lender has it different, we're gonna have to use what their lender says ultimately, because they got all the money, right? But usually if you get it early enough, they can switch that. It's just, if you get it late, they don't wanna switch it, because so the customer friendly part of the loan process is at the loan officer stage, right? Cause they're just like you and me, you know, we've got to deal with the public, you know, we've got to be friendly. The closers and the underwriters, they don't deal with the public, so they don't have to be nearly as friendly. So when it gets to that stage, they're much less likely to make a change because it's more work for them, right? Get it at the loan officer stage early on, they're gonna bend over backwards to do it however you want them to do it, right? That makes sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, subtle little thing, but I think it gets you in the right mindset, right? You're using this to meet their needs. And so, on that same point, you've got, for whatever reason, one of two spouses that is approved on the loan, right? The loan approval only mentions one of them. But you've been taking both of them, and the one who's not on the loan is the one who's been asking all the questions, and the one who's getting all, you know, okay, and sexist though it may be, typically, that's the wife, right? And it is no longer the norm for the husband to be on the loan and the wife not to be on the loan. I see it equally as far as that goes. In fact, with younger people, it seems completely flip-flopped, where it is the wife on the loan, right, and the husband is not on the loan. So I'm not trying to make but in terms of showing houses and who has opinions, I still see that as mainly the wife, right?
Happy wife, happy life.
So, I'm not trying to be sexist, but that's just what I see, okay? So it would be offensive if you just take the name from the loan approval and put it on the contract and then forget the person you've been talking to the most, right? The person who's been engaged in this whole process, and we're not gonna include them on the contract. That's not what you need to do. Now, if the lender has some reason that they can't be on there, let the lender make that call, not you, right? Okay, just we've done all this, so I don't wanna belabor it. Okay, so we know the purchaser blank, we know how to fill that blank. Hereby agrees to purchase, and the underlying sellers blank. Now, this is more complicated, remember? Okay, so where do we start that process of figuring out who the seller is? Do you remember?
Title search.
Well, that's where we end, really. But at your stage, when you're filling out this contract, you're not gonna have a title search, right? What tools do you have available to help you figure this out? The tax assessor, or dream maps, okay? That's where you start. It's not where you end, right? You start there because it's gonna give you some names or a name, and then it also gives you a link to look up the deed. Now, if you just consider always try to put yourself in your client's shoes, right? You're trying to look at things through your client's perspective. If you're showing up to a listing agent, or a listing appointment, and you've got a printout, well, okay, I would do a printout of paper, because I just like paper, because it's like, my little security blanket, like Linus, okay? You may use your phone, that's fine, as long as you have looked it up and you've got it to say, okay, here are the taxes, here is the deed, right? And the names on the deed should be that's where you're saying, okay, this is where I've gotta deal with this. So remember, if there's two names on the deed and you're dealing with one person, you need to find out what happened, right? Is he or she passed away? Okay, in which case you need court documents. We need court documents. You don't have to remember what they're called, you just need court documents. Do you have court documents on this? Most of the time, if it's just a husband and a wife, the deed is joint with right of survivorship, and a death certificate is all we need. But you need some documentation, okay? If you're dealing with a child, and it was their parents' home, and dad just recently died, right? You will need court documents, right? So that all depends on what the deed says, but if somebody's dead, we need to be asking questions, and that's where Lisa and Kathy are more than happy to be engaged with you. Okay, if it's a divorce, remember, if it's a divorce and the husband is remarried or the wife is remarried and they're living there, and you've got the husband and ex-wife and new wife to deal with, right? If ex-wife is still on the deed, she's gotta come off. The divorce decree is not enough. There's gotta be a deed. If there hasn't been a deed done, we're gonna have to do that. So we need to know about that early, so that because sometimes that's complicated, you can imagine, right?
I just dealt with that, and it was great. The realtor called me, they just got divorced. He's supposed to quit, she even sent me the divorce decree, but he was supposed to quit claim it over, and he hadn't. So we drew one up, mailed it to him, I just got it back yesterday. So
Yeah.
the file's ready to go, when she sells the house.
Thankfully, it was done quickly, right?
I know, yeah, she goes, he's pretty good, I think he'll do it. I mean, I just sent an email, I never even met him before, and he was like, signed it, got it notarized, sent it back.
That's a success story.
That's
Yes.
a very good
Yes.
story, yeah.
But if that happened and it was still acrimonious, right? They're not happy with each other, then we'll know if he's gonna say, well, what is it, you know, what, you want a deed in this hand, but I've got nothing in this hand, you know, what's in it for me, right? And even though the divorce decree doesn't give him the right to do that, that sometimes happens. So, but the earlier you know about that, the better off we are, okay? So divorce, now that is a jug.
That's Yarden. She takes her water bottle everywhere.
Is that water?
She's good.
Yeah.
You drink a lot of water. Okay, the bathroom is right back there. Okay,
Okay, so I had a question yesterday.
okay,
An agent called and said, I have a couple, or I have a lady that wants to list her house with me. She's already been divorced, they got divorced in
so
like.
this is an agent calling you and asking this question, okay.
So, she wants to list her house because she can't afford it anymore by herself.
Right.
And the husband doesn't want to. And I'm like, so what I asked was, is he on the deed? And she said yes. And I was
Okay.
like, well, then she can't. Am I right?
Now, without his approval,
Unless he, yeah.
I mean, they can go, you know, they can go back to the divorce court and force him, right? But yeah, without that, that's unwise on multiple levels to not get the quitclaim deed, and that's usually the type. Quitclaim is just a type of deed, okay? And that's typically what divorce lawyers use, that type of deed.
So like if it says they get the house, they should go ahead and do that.
do the
way.
deed right then.
Mhm.
Don't,
Yeah,
I mean, if they don't get it then,
yeah.
it's a problem. But that's a divorce lawyer stuff. I mean, that's beyond what we can control. Yes.
So they should do it like right when it's, like, they know when it's gonna be signed, that they're gonna get their certificate, so they should have already, like, at that moment, they should be working on that.
They should have
As
it
well.
right there. Mhm.
Yeah.
They basically, usually there's some sort of obligation on both parts. You've gotta do this, I've gotta do this, you've gotta do this. I would say none of that stuff should happen until the deed is done, right? You don't make your last payment, if you will, you know, or I wouldn't even start making payments until that deed is done. Because so many times that comes up and then it's complicated.
I had
get
one
hurt.
that was a, what is it, finance purchase or lease to purchase?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. So the,
Installment sale, land
Yes.
sale, there's a lot of different ways to say
so the deed is under not the owner's name. So
Well-
there's a financial,
that. Okay, so
entity.
the way that works is, I own the property, okay? Kathy is gonna buy it from me over time. So we enter into a special kind of contract, an installment sale contract. And she's technically owns the property as far as she's paying for it, she's doing the taxes, she's doing all the repairs, she lives in it. But legally, I still own the property. So that's the scenario, right?
yes.
Okay?
Yes, so we go to closing because they agreed upon selling the property, but you still have the deed and Kathy decides to sell the house.
Right.
So we go to closing, but there's a little bit of an issue personally between the two. So we had investor guy sitting outside,
Yeah.
but Kathy
Yeah, use me. No,
yeah, Kathy was signing the documents. So there must have been some kind of agreement, I guess, where half ownership or something.
Well, so-
How did that work?
So she might, I mean, I don't know why they let her sign the documents, honestly.
Okay.
She had little right to sign anything, but it didn't, there's one document that matters, the deed,
Okay.
right? They both needed to sign a deed. And so maybe, was it a cash deal by chance?
No, it was finance. It was finance, but she said the deed, I believe the deed was in her name, but the monies that were exchanged at the sale, there was something that he was getting at the sale.
Yeah, so he could have just been private financing.
Something like that,
Yeah,
I think.
that could have, so he's like a bank.
Right.
But it's kind of the other one is kind of a hybrid, but yes, they would both in that case have to sign something,
Okay.
like either a release or both sign the deed.
Okay. Yeah, there was something, but they were not in the same room, so it was a little bit more complicated because we have buyer and seller in
Oh,
the
yeah.
room, and then
I've
there was
had
an extra person in the other room.
I've had divorce situations where you got a buyer and seller, and the sellers have husband and wife, ex-wife, and they would not be in the same room. So we have the husband and his attorney, and the wife, ex-wife, and her attorney in one room, and then everybody else is in this room. So yes, complications happen. Okay, so point is, if you show up to the listing agreement and you've already got the deed and you're prepared and you look professional and it just gives a good message, and you're also prepared to ask questions about, okay, how come
this deed?
how come this doesn't match?
Who gets to
right?
sell the house? That's
Yeah.
always a fun question.
I mean, I think that's really good advice. Do y'all do that now? Like, I don't know people that bring the deed. I usually have agents that call me, hey, I'll ask them, have you seen the deed? No.
Yeah.
We need to start doing it.
It's
I know
just
on our
easy.
listing,
It's
I
all
always
online.
include the tax records with our
Right.
initial,
But they're not
sign this, but
Yeah,
yes,
right.
they're not
Right.
always, yeah.
They're-
Like a
no,
year, 2
that's
years,
the
you know.
point.
That's the reason why he's saying.
We
like,
need to
That's
ask
the
for
point.
a copy of the deed to be ready when we come into the listing appointment. I made a note of that, like that needs to be in the pre-listing packet.
Yeah, I just think it makes you look very professional, and it gives you tools to ask difficult questions,
Right.
right?
Without being awkward.
Yeah, I mean, because it's gonna be awkward when you're sitting there dealing, again, I use, Bob and Mary, right? And the deed says Bob and Susie. You're gonna have to deal with it. So it's easier to say, well, the deed doesn't match what you just said. And say,
We are
"Oh,
actually in the middle of a land sale issue where it was an estate. She had documents that gave her rights to sign on the estate. However, after we went under listing, the attorney on the probate side called and said she doesn't have the rights anymore.
So that's out of the ordinary. That means that some of the heirs basically came forward and said, hey, we want to remove her, she's done something wrong.
Oh.
right?
Every
Um,
one of our agents has a contract on that lot too, just about.
And we've been waiting for like, what, a month?
We
Yeah.
had
It's been
so
about a
many
month now, a month
offers
and a
on
half.
it.
We can't even discuss it amongst ourselves.
Yeah, we
Let's
really
keep our
can't
mouths
talk
shut.
about this.
That's why we're not even saying anything.
So that's out of the ordinary, but you need to ask, then the attorney would need to provide some, documentation on who is.
That's where we're at right now,
We're waiting
hopefully.
on that.
Yeah, but it could
And
be,
waiting,
it could be
and
they're
waiting.
fighting over it.
And
Right.
waiting.
Okay, so once an estate is opened, and then they start fighting, okay, now the timing goes out the window. Okay? So, cause now we're in court world, and in court world, they don't know, it's a different calendar than our world. Our world is usually a 30-day life cycle,
Right.
right? Well, 30 days, it doesn't even, it's like a minute, you know, to them. I mean, 30 days is like, it doesn't even register as time. Nothing happens quickly. in
It's been a
court.
minute.
It's been a couple minutes.
It's only been a
So
minute.
you just have to keep in touch with the attorney. Who's the attorney?
Milburn,
Gross.
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I talk to him twice a week.
okay, good.
Nice guy.
Yeah, oh, no, he's a very nice guy. He does a lot of probate work.
Yes.
It's sitting on the judge's desk, you know, we're just waiting for it to get signed
Well,
off on.
We do have a new judge, and so we're still trying to
Oh, yeah.
figure out how he works and all of that. So we used to have the old judge figured out, and we knew what we could get, and when we could get it. But now the new judge, you know, we're figuring it out. Okay, so next line, address. We want to look up the address on the Postal Service website, right? USPS.com. That's the best way to do it. That's what the lender is going to do. And so if we want to match the lender, that's the best way to do it, okay? So if it has a northwest or a southeast, include it, right? Pretty straightforward. Now, the next line that I'm gonna talk about is number 1, total purchase price. Okay, let's think about this. Okay, this is where we're gonna spend the bulk of our time today, is talking about the practical, how do we figure out the numbers? So, let's keep our hat on, we're the listing agent, and we're going to the listing side. We're going to the listing appointment, and we're trying to come up with how much do we need to sell this house for? Right? What kinds of things have you already done to figure that out? Comps, and we call that what? The process is,
CNA.
right, the market
Market
analysis,
analysis.
yes. And so we're creating a market analysis, and we're saying, okay, based on similar price, or similar homes in a reasonably defined geographical area that have sold in a recent time, right? You have a range. They're averaging, whatever, $100 a foot, or $150 a foot, whatever it is, okay?
Or 260 in new construction.
Yeah, so it depends on where you are, yes, exactly, but it's gone crazy.
Crazy.
But, so you have a number, so that we're gonna get a range, okay, it's gonna be from X to Y, right? 200 to 210, somewhere in that range. So you have a range of, based on just looking at comps, this is what it is reasonably expected to be. Okay. Is that where you stop? So let's say, okay, we're gonna go to the high end of that range and say 210. We're gonna put 210 on the contract, because that's the high end of the range. Does that seem reasonable?
I mean,
Depends. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, if they're
depends.
comfortable, yeah, I
Oh.
would say yes.
Okay, that's not a bad answer. It's just not complete, right? I would say that's the way most people do this. The problem with that is you don't know enough details. Okay? Number one, this discussion always has to take into account where the market is at this moment. Okay? And we're in a place that we've never been in the time that I've been doing this business. Talked to an appraiser the other day who's been doing it longer than I have, and he said he's never seen a market like this. Okay? So we're in a seller's market. The reason it's a seller's market is why?
No inventory.
There's more people looking than there are houses to sell them, right? So what does that do to our upper range of the houses? Okay, so just because the comps say one thing,
Right.
the shortage is not getting any better, do we need to be limited to those comps?
Not necessarily. Not in this market.
Not necessarily. Now we have a question mark,
Right.
right? And it's a legitimate question mark.
Mhm.
And if we put it too low, are we doing our client a good service?
No,
Definitely.
but
No,
you
we're
can't
not.
put it too high either.
You put it too high, generally speaking,
Appraisal ain't
you're
gonna-
not gonna, well, appraisal's a different issue,
Yeah.
we'll get there, that's a problem. But if you put it too high and you have 6 offers in 3 days, it's not too high.
Right.
No, that's true.
Yeah.
It's not too high,
Means
Okay.
People are desperate.
and that's where they are,
Yeah.
that's where they are.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, so, that's one issue on considering that, okay? But do you think that seller has an idea of how much money they wanna walk away with,
Oh, yeah.
okay? Before you got there,
Mhm.
they had an idea of what they wanted to get. So before I fill in the top line, I wanna know what the bottom line has to be, right? I wanna know what the bottom line is, and then I wanna figure out how to get to the top line.
Mhm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, so what goes into that? Right, on the seller side, what goes into figuring that out?
What they owe.
Certainly what they owe, right? Do they have a mortgage on the property? Okay, so you have to ask that question. Do you have a mortgage on the property? Yes, I do, right?
Mhm.
Now, the next question is more difficult. And there's different ways to go about this, but one way I would recommend is say, hey, you know what, in order to make this the most accurate, we need an accurate payoff. Okay? We need an accurate payoff number. Well, they're gonna rattle a number off. It's wrong,
Mhm.
okay? And just say, yeah, you know what, that's probably what's on your statement, but that's a balance, that's a principal balance, that's not the payoff number. So why don't we do this? Why don't we, get your, information out, and there's an 800 number that we can call for a payoff. Why don't we do that together? Okay? Now this is extra stuff, but you're gonna get, first of all, you're gonna get a good number, but think about how that makes you look. You know what you're doing, right? You're not just guessing, you're not just, okay, I'm gonna try to throw something together just to get you to sign something, right? So, before we get there, let's figure out, first of all, what your payoff is. Okay, we're gonna get a payoff good through, let's say we sell this and we're gonna close within 30 days. So we're gonna get a payoff good through 30 days, right? And we're gonna write that down. And then, what else do we need to know?
Different liens or judgments, anything like that.
You can ask them that, typically that's something that they're not going to,
Disclose.
volunteer.
Yeah.
But, but it's a good question to ask, do you have any liens against the property? Hey, how are ya? Do you have any liens against the property? Right? Sometimes, or do you just say, do you have any liens or judgments against you? Cause they don't know oftentimes that that attaches to the property, right? So that's, but we won't go down that path too much. What else?
Do they plan on filing bankruptcy?
Yes.
Wow.
Are they in bankruptcy or
Planning on.
foreclosure?
Yeah.
Or are you planning on doing it before closing? Right?
Yes.
Are you in bankruptcy or foreclosure? So, about the payoff. If they're in a foreclosure situation, you will not be able to get a payoff when you call that 800 number. That's another reason to do that.
Okay.
Because it will kick you out and say that it's not able to give you that payoff. If that happens, you gotta ask more questions. Okay? Say, are you current on your mortgage? Well, I haven't paid in 6 months. Okay, so that balance, that principal balance number is really off. Really, really off, okay? So you can't give them an accurate number if you have that situation. You just can't. We're gonna have to get a payoff. Have you been dealing, did you get any letters? Have you been dealing with an attorney or anything like that? Okay, or have you been dealing with the lender? Yes, I've been calling them. Said, okay, who have you been calling? Okay, that's probably a good time to get us involved, by the way. But you know, there's no way to get an accurate payoff in that situation. Cause then, if it's, depending on what part of the process it's in, it could be, they could have incurred attorney's fees and all this kind of stuff, right? So it could be way higher. You'd just be guessing. So, what else do they need? Do you need to know?
Improvements maybe that they've made. I know that runs through sellers' minds. I put so much improvements into this house, and you're gonna have to kind of walk through what improvements and how does that fall into.
Well, in coming up, agreed, but in coming up with the numbers, in terms of figuring out how to get to their bottom line, that's probably not gonna play into it very much. Okay, what, in terms of numbers, what comes off of the purchase price?
Oh, commissions. and
Commissions, okay,
Closing costs.
commissions and settlement charges, right? Where do we find the settlement charges?
Estimated closing sheets? No?
That's the tool to plug in information, but that's where, it's the contract, right?
Oh, okay.
Okay?
Mm-hmm.
The contract says what they have to pay. Now, the estimated closing statement is a tool, it's not a very accurate tool, and that's what, do I?
I agree with that.
Yeah. It's not a very accurate tool, and that's what we're going to help you sort of get more accurate. That's what we're gonna
That's our
introduce
job.
to. But there's things in the contract that they have to pay, right? Where do we find that? Most of that.
Right there in the front.
Paragraph 2.
Yeah.
Paragraph 2, right? Settlement charges. Let's read this. Purchaser's loan closing costs. That's the only time you see closing costs in this contract now is when it's modified by loan closing costs. That right there is the only time you see it. So we don't call it closing costs because closing cost by itself doesn't appear in the contract. Okay, settlement charges does, right? So purchaser's loan closing costs, prepaid items, escrows, loan discount fees and funding fees, PMI, MIP, and VA funding fees are to be paid by purchaser unless herein accepted, right? So we just listed a whole bunch of stuff that the purchaser has to pay, right? Now keep going, we're dealing with the seller, aren't we?
Mm-hmm.
So funding fee, finance, yes or no, then move on. Seller agrees to contribute up to blank towards purchaser's total settlement charges, including purchaser's half of title insurance and those costs purchaser is not allowed to pay under FHA, VA, and conventional requirements, right? but exclusive of direct seller costs, i.e. deed, seller's half of title insurance, payoff expenses, etc. Okay, let's stop there for a minute. What did we just say? A lot.
Yeah,
Mhm.
that there's a.
In the context of this discussion, that we're trying to help the seller figure out how to get to their bottom line, what did we just say?
So we need to get
There's
the
fees involved and
fees for the seller's half of the title
Seller has
insurance,
to pay
payoff
half
and
of the
expenses.
entitle, yeah.
Yeah, they're paying for the deed and half of the title insurance and payoff expenses,
Mhm.
okay? So we know for sure, even if they put 0 on that little line, they're paying for the deed, half the title insurance, and payoff expenses.
Mhm.
So you need to know those things, okay? So that's stuff that you need to be thinking about. And I'd have, the title insurance is something that's where, that tool that we're talking about, we can help you with. And we can give you exact, dead on how much that is, okay? That's what we do. What else, other than those 3 things, does the contract require the seller to pay?
Invoice, purchase renewal, costs and contingent.
What the buyer, are you talking about like what the buyer can't pay as far as VA?
Well,
Some
the
things that
contract
require-
doesn't require the seller to pay that, but that's exactly the question. That's exactly the question. See, if it's a VA loan, there are such things called VA non-allowable fees. There are some in FHA, but it's really not an issue. And if you put 0 in that blank, then it creates an issue because the lender is gonna say, hey, the seller has to pay this. That's not true. This just means that the buyer can't pay it,
right.
right? So the lender has to eat it. That's what VA rules say. The lender has to eat it, right?
What would that be? Like what?
Every lender's got a different set. Okay, there's a long list of things in the VA underwriting guidelines that say these are non-allowables. And it all depends on which of those lists that the lender charges, right? So each lender is gonna be a little bit different, and so on VA loans, you've got to get that information from the lender, period. There's no way to guess, and that's one of the many problems with the ECS. ECS is trying to do one size fits all, and it's just wrong,
So basically, you have to talk to the lender and ask them.
what their non-allowables are. Okay, and then you put that number aside, cause remember, where are we at this stage? We're trying to come up with what they're selling for, what they're willing to do, to come up with the bottom line, right? So what else do we need to know? Don't look at the contract for a moment, just think about it. What else do we need to know?
Down payment.
We're on the seller side.
Oh, seller side.
Well, we're just trying to figure out what they need to walk away with, right?
Yes, so you need,
So-
in order to figure out what they need to walk away with, you need to know how many things you have to pay,
Mhm.
right? What do they have to pay? So we've got commission, we've got their half a title insurance, deed, and payoff expenses. What else?
Taxes.
Taxes, right?
Yeah.
They've got to prorate the taxes, that's in the contract, okay? But this is just one of those things that you've gotta know. You've gotta know, the way our tax system works, property tax system, we pay backwards in arrears, right? So, the tax year, if we close today, the tax year for now started October 1st of last year. So they're gonna prorate from October 1st until the closing date, right? Now, as long as you put the information in the ECS correctly, it will calculate that for you. But you gotta make sure the zip code is correct and the address is correct. I mean, if you put that zip code wrong, it could be completely different, right? But that's one of those things you gotta know. Prorated taxes.
What I typically do in this is, Remax actually has a separate seller estimated sheet that I personally use, and I like it better. I don't use the automated one. But basically what you need to do is you need to have that tax information before you go to the listing appointment.
Correct.
And know exactly how much they're paying, and you just figure it out yourself. Instead of relying on, if you use the Remax seller estimated sheet, that's the easiest way to do it.
Just by dividing it by 12, basically. To
You could
figure
do
out what
that.
they're paying
You
monthly
just,
on
you
it.
just break it down.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not complicated, you just gotta know that you gotta do it, because if you don't have that in your head, and for some reason you forget, and you look at it, you gotta know, oh, that's missing, right? That's missing. I have seen, sitting in that chair right there, guy got so angry, cause his realtor forgot to do the prorated taxes, okay? Clearly his obligation under the contract. But he was so angry, I mean, he literally stood up, I mean, red-faced, knocked the chair over.
Jeez.
Oh my word.
Over $200.
Yes, yes. I mean, craziness, right? That's why this is such a big deal.
Yeah.
Now, most people aren't, unstable, but,
But it could happen.
it could happen.
We live in a weird
Gotta deal
world.
with that now.
Anything makes people tick.
But even if they're not unstable, right, even if they're reasonably stable, they're gonna be upset about it.
Right.
They're not gonna throw chairs around, but they're gonna say, hey, this is not right. And again, remember when they walk out of here, if they're not happy, who are they gonna talk bad about?
Yeah.
Right? Mostly you, cause you're the one who gave them the bad numbers,
Yeah.
right? Okay,
Yeah.
what else do we need to know? Just think about it. On the selling side, what else would they might have to pay?
HOAs and repairs.
Could be HOA, could be HOA, there may be, you gotta make sure if there is an HOA, you need to know, and you need to know if they're current, just like the mortgage, cause that's a lien on the property, right?
Yes.
So that's very, very good. That's part of prorations. That's part of the prorations, part of the contract, okay? And what else did you say, cause it's very important?
And repairs, I said.
Repairs,
Mhm.
okay? Repairs. Now, at this stage, do we know what the repairs are gonna be? No, we don't know what the repairs are gonna be. So we've got a couple of items right now that we really don't know what they're gonna be. We don't know what they're gonna be asked to contribute towards settlement charges, right? And we don't know what the repairs are gonna be. So those are our question marks. But with what we have, what can we do now? We've
Get
got
a
enough
pretty good
now,
number. Yeah.
we can estimate,
Mhm.
okay? So, we can go put in, okay, we've gotta end up at a number, whatever that number is, okay? We know the payoff, so we take that number, right? Now we're adding back the things that we know that they've gotta pay. And then we get to a number, okay, here's the number just to pay the things that we know. Is that enough? No, because we got repairs potentially.
Right.
Right? We don't wanna cut ourselves so tight on the front end before we even put it on the market. We've gotta leave ourselves some room. You see? So, okay,
Maybe a little bit of money in their pocket so they can buy a
Correct.
house, possibly.
correct. Well, that's the bottom line part. That's the bottom line part. We know we gotta make sure they get that bottom line.
Right.
Okay? So now now you're gonna have to,
You ready?
yes.
Okay. Go to Google. Actually, type this in. Yikes. Go to your web browser or whatever. Title capture, like you're capturing something. .com.
.com.
And then, what's it bringing up? Is there a place to log in?
It says this site can't be found. Hold on. TITLECAPTURE.com. Now it's telling me I have no internet, but I had internet, so hold on.
Sorry, technical
Yeah,
difficulties.
did you send them, if you send me the last email that you sent to them, I can email them the link
No.
Okay, the last email that,
that you sent to them, so that
Okay.
I got their email addresses.
oh, I didn't. Marie and I did text.
Oh,
I don't have their email.
Yours isn't working
it's
either.
frozen.
Oh,
Does
are y'all on
anybody
the
else have internet
y'all-
access? Cause I'm not
internet
getting any internet
Our
access.
internet is horrid.
Yeah, it
I
says
can't get
that
on
it's
either.
connected, but I'm not getting any,
Yeah, I'm not gonna.
You don't have a signal, right?
no. It just says no internet.
That's what, I had to go in there. Alright, so, I wonder if I get off. Are you on the internet, Lisa?
I am,
So mine.
That's weird.
I know.
Okay, try again, everybody try again, get
Yeah.
on
I'm
there.
trying to see if it'll
No.
It says that
resolve the
they're not-
Yeah, I'm on
problem.
They're not even on the internet. They're like,
Oh.
can't get a signal. Okay, I mean, I guess we can use your phone.
I mean, I can sit on one side of the table
Let me see
and
if
they
I
can
can
Okay.
run around.
Scheduled to.
Okay, let's do that.
online
Bring your
demo.
computer over here, Lisa, and then I'll use mine over here.
It says Wi-Fi doesn't have valid IP configuration. What the heck that's supposed to
It's giving
mean?
me a schedule a demo when I get on here too.
Okay. We're gonna just, since y'all can't get on your laptop.
Wait a minute, she's on.
They turn the Wi-Fi off and on.
On her phone.
I know, but I don't know that you're gonna be able to log in on your phone. Let me see your
Yeah,
phone.
cause it's a schedule a demo. That's all it's giving me.
Yeah.
Well,
Give me 1 second to find a piece of gum because that coffee breath, nobody wants to sit there.
I have some mints. So none of y'all can get on here?
It says reset the wireless adapter for your, for your router.
This is the problem I
That's what
had
it says.
yesterday, and I
It's
couldn't
too
get on
many.
either, I had to go in there. This is so weird, to download a title request from a secure.
Huh.
But now I'm on.
We can
Maybe
just
it's too
hover
many
around
trying to
you.
get on it.
Yeah, that's
We
what I
can
said.
hover around you.
Mhm.
yeah, so this was not a good plan, so,
We'll hover. Do you wanna sit?
Okay.
I'll let you sit in the center and I'm gonna.
Yeah, Marie, you wanna come over here?
I'll let you
So
sit.
she has one and I have one.
okay, wait a minute, what are we doing? This doesn't make
We're
any
gonna
sense.
use mine.
We're
We're
hovering.
using
Can y'all
hers.
see?
So they're
Oh,
gonna
I
get
see.
on hers and we're gonna get on
I
hers.
got it.
And Kim's gonna
Kim,
pick a
Coming
side.
real close like a you love me.
here, you sit, you sit there, I'm gonna just sit here. Okay, so what you're gonna do, this,
Fancy too.
is estimating tools, okay?
So we're not, okay, here's the focus. The focus is not right now
Right.
learning the tool, okay?
Mhm.
The focus is learning the process,
Mm-hmm.
Gotcha.
okay? That's the focus, right?
Okay.
Because we
Yes,
can use
sir.
different tools if we understand the process, right? We can use the Remax tool, we can even use the ECS if we understand it. The problem is, if we don't understand it and we use the ECS, you're gonna get in trouble, because it's wrong, right? If you do understand it, then you can go in and make changes, right? So that's
Yours are so big.
that's our bigger picture goals, keep that in mind, okay?
If you too, in the packets that we put in front of you, there's a second part two. It's like beginning at the end in mind. And this first page, well, actually, the first page is just questions to you guys. Is it important to reverse engineer your numbers? The answer is yes.
Yeah, that's
So-
what we've been talking about.
So we will go over that in a second. But the very next page says what's next. Let's look first at the next sheet for sellers. So this is what Kathy and I are pulling up right now, and what we're gonna go over. So I just wanted to let you guys know where we're at so you can follow along too.
And
So
a lot of
we're
this
at
Alan has already talked about, and we'll, as we go through, we'll talk about it some more. So the first thing is, you need to know the address. So anybody wanna volunteer their address, or
I can do
somebody to
mine.
work with? Okay.
3207 Pierside.
How do you spell Pierce?
P-I-E-R, side, circle. Sorry, P-I-E-R.
Owens
Like up
Crossroads?
here,
Like
yes,
up here.
Oh,
side. P-I-E-R-S-I-D-E. It's all one word. There
right
we
here,
go.
on Crossroads?
Mhm.
Okay. And Alan talked about looking that up on the mail USPS
USPS.
website, so that's where you wanna start.
Okay.
Then, what this is asking for on the net sheet is what your comp says this property should be listed at. You're
I'm
gonna
gonna-
tell me,
So,
this is what
in
I
this
think.
case, the 210 is what we were,
Okay.
what we were talking about. Okay, the 210 was the high end of the comps,
Okay?
right? We're not gonna end there,
Mhm.
but it'll help us figure out where to go
Mhm.
next.
Okay, so we're gonna start with that. And then, let's pick a closing date. You wanna say,
30 days.
30 days.
So
March 14th.
honestly, you're presenting this right when you are trying to get that listing, right? And you're not gonna close 30 days from the time that
Right.
you're trying to get the listing, right? So I would recommend that you put 60 days out, because that's accounting for like 30 days to get under contract and then 30 days to close, so that you're not having to do a net sheet or estimated closing statement over and over and over and over again, right? So 60 days is like a good shot when you're just initially getting the listing.
okay, we're gonna do April 14th. Okay. Then, what Alan was saying, you're gonna call and get a payoff, okay? Right, you're gonna get on the phone with your client, let's call your lender, let's see what your payoff amount would be. Alright, what do we wanna make this?
170.
Okay. And you also, at this time, another thing to learn, a home equity loan is another payoff.
Sometimes they don't think that's.
That's true.
Part of their payoff.
Do you have a home equity? That's in your questions,
Mhm.
right? Do you have a home equity loan?
Mhm.
Because they don't think that as a payoff at all. That's
They
just-
don't. I had somebody sitting right here and he was like, well, I was gonna pay that off myself.
Yeah.
And I'm like, no, yeah, you can't do
Yeah.
that, so, okay?
So
And
to
it
the
goes
property.
along with the original loan then.
Mhm.
It's
Well,
not a
not
separate-
necessarily.
It's not a separate
It's
one.
like it's separate.
Mhm.
Like a second mortgage.
It's like a second mortgage. They don't think of it that way.
It's like a lien,
It is a
basically.
second mortgage is what it is, okay? So when you say mortgage payoffs, a home equity line, you got the first mortgage and then a home equity line.
Gotcha.
So we gotta pay them both off, so you gotta have a payoff for both.
Mhm.
It's a little more complicated usually to get the home equity line, but same process.
So
Okay.
they think it's like just a regular loan that they're
Mhm.
getting, that they don't have to pay off when they
To
sell
sell the
their house.
property.
Well, they
Mm.
probably think they have to pay it off, but they don't think of it.
They
Yes.
think they can
Yes,
get the
not-
cash and then pay it off.
Yes, which
Right.
is a no.
That's what this guy
Right.
thought.
Or just pay it monthly like they've been paying it.
Sometimes they
and
think
not-
that. Sometimes they think that, and that's a major no-no.
Yeah.
Right.
So that's a big shocker. If you don't know that up front,
Mhm.
that's a big cut into the net.
Right.
Yeah.
So they do, you need to ask that question. So there is a place on here where we could put a second payoff, second mortgage. Then, of course, you're gonna go to commission. So we're just going through, we're doing price,
I like it.
we're doing comps, we're doing payoffs, now we're at commission, okay? On this, I put 3 and 3.
Mhm.
And we can adjust that. And y'all can figure that on your own. One
Yeah.
or three, kind of
You
cover
could just
yourself
put in
for
this
this.
when they turn it on.
This also has
And
a
then you
place
guys
where you
approve
can
them.
tell me if there's a transaction fee that the seller will be paying, okay? Then you wanna check with the HOA. Is there an HOA?
And is there, because a lot of times not, even if they're caught up on the HOA as the seller, right? There's a transaction fee or transfer fee that will be charged, and a lot of times that's split. So that's one of those, things you need to know. And that that's something you can do in advance.
Yeah.
Right?
Call
And
That's
I would
something,
highly, highly recommend if they tell you, oh yeah, it's so and so and so and so, just to be a good agent, don't wait for us to find out, because a lot of times by the time we get it, they're like, oh yeah, they're paid up, but they owe, a transfer fee. In McMullen Cove, it's 1% of the sales price.
Ooh,
no, it's
Kimberly Miller's
0.25%.
Point.
So the estimated closing
About to
statement,
what is it?
right, and auto defaults to
0.25%.
$75 as a transfer fee. So if you leave that auto default in there at $75 and you've got an $8,000 transfer fee, you're just about $8,000 off on your estimated
That's
closing.
and that's a lot of money.
That's a
to
lot
get.
of money.
0.25, that's $150,000.
Point zero.
Point
Oh,
zero
0.25, okay.
The other thing
They're
too is when
making
you're
a
talking
killing over
to,
there.
Yeah, right. Jeez.
when you're talking to
God,
the
what's
potential
the
client
bill
about
for
listing their house and you say, oh, do you have an HOA? So you're asking them those standard questions, right? And they say, oh, yes, you know, it's
Oh,
$400 a year. You know, ask them if they've got the name and
Oh,
number.
yeah.
You know, you're gonna need that for the listing anyway, when you input it. But do your due diligence and
That's right, like
call
an
the
$800,000
POC, call the point of contact for the HOA and say, hey, I'm going to be
Something like that.
listing
It's a
this
large
house. She
number.
says it's
Yeah.
$400 a
Yeah,
year. Is that accurate? Right? And because I've had this or seen this happen before, right? Where they say, well, it is right now, but as of the new year, it's going to be $450. Or as of the new year, we're not going to be charging yearly anymore. It's going to be bi-yearly or it's going to be monthly, right? So find out from them right from the jump, because you want to accurately